So when we're trying to be more productive, there is a mental model that I find really helpful, and that's the pilot, the plane, and the engineer. And it's the three different modes that we have to be in at different parts of the day. And then being more productive is just a matter of optimizing the pilot or the plane or the engineer, working out which ones we need to work on and then improving those things. Hey everyone, welcome to my second class about productivity. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm a doctor based in the UK, and on the side, I run a YouTube channel, a podcast, a weekly email newsletter, a blog, and at the moment, 3 side businesses. And people often ask me, how are you so productive? So in the first class, we talked about the productivity equation and the general underlying principles of productivity. But in this class, we're going to talk about this idea of the pilot, the plane, and the engineer. And I'm going to share various actionable strategies that I found helpful over the years to improve my productivity in these 3 different domains. So if you want to learn how to be more productive, which I would define as doing the things we want to be doing efficiently while also having fun along the way, that's kind of my model for it. If you want to learn how to be more productive, how to be a better pilot, plane, engineer, you should definitely join me on this class. I'll be sharing the theory and the practical insights that I've gained over the last many years of trying to juggle all of these different things at the same time. And along the way, we've got a load of exercises that you can do to help you be more productive from right now. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you on the other side. All right, this is the section where we're talking about the role of the pilot, and I think we should be acting as the pilot maybe around 10% of the time. I've plucked this number out of thin air, but I think it's around about accurate. Pilot 10%, plane 80 to 85%, and engineer maybe 5 to 10%. Those are the general proportions that I try to think of. And the role of the pilot is to set the course for the plane. Now, the way that I think about this is that there are very few moments in the day where we actually have some sense of clarity about what we need to do, what our purpose is. For me, that's usually first thing in the morning. I usually wake up, I will have a shower that gets me fully energized, make my morning cup of coffee, and then I will sit outside on the balcony or at my desk or on the sofa, depending on how lazy I'm feeling, and I'll kind of make a vague plan for the rest of the day. Normally, I do some journaling in day 1, the app. I occasionally use the morning pages tactic, which involves just kind of freehand typing out whatever you want. Technically, you're supposed to kind of write it down, but I prefer typing it. And once I've gotten everything off my mind, I will look at my calendar, look at my to-do lists, more on that in a second, and I'll try and figure out what actually I need to do in the day. And so in the morning, I'm setting the intention for the rest of the day. And that's kind of what the role of the pilot is. The role of the pilot is to make sure that the output that we are going to output is actually useful, i.e. it's in line with what we need to be doing and what we want to be doing. And there's lots of different ways that we can think about that. To be honest, most people probably don't really have a problem with the pilot section. If you're a beginner to the productivity realm, and this was certainly me a couple of years ago, most of us have an issue with the plane aspect of it. And so if you don't care about the pilot at all, feel free to move on to the plane section of this class. But for me now, honestly, like the thing that I struggle with most is the pilot, like making sure that the stuff that I'm getting done is the stuff that I need to be doing and want to be doing. And thirdly, that I'm leveraging my time and attention appropriately. And so for the lessons in this section, we're going to split up the role of the pilot into 3 parts. We're going to talk about the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And this is sort of related to an idea that David Allen introduced in his book, Getting Things Done. And that's the idea of horizons of focus. And I think it's very worth understanding this concept of horizons of focus. And it's also very worth reading Getting Things Done. If you haven't read it already, it's literally the Bible on productivity. But essentially, there are 6 different horizons. The first one is on the ground. We have calendars and actions. And that's basically like the groundwork, like all the stuff we have to do. So for me, it's filming this class today, replying to 5 different emails, making sure I go for lunch with a friend. It's like these like ground level tasks that we actually have to get done. Horizon 1 is projects. And these are things that we're working on that usually require more than 1 step to get done. So for example, this entire Skillshare class is a project, but filming specifically on this day and filming this one individual video would be more like a ground level task. Most people probably have between 30 and 100 active projects running at a given time. To give you an idea, like a project can basically be anything. So one of my projects is to remodel the balcony of my house. Another project is to figure out what TV to buy for the living room and kind of revamp the living room setup. Another project is to get furniture for the spare bedroom that I've just got. Another project is this Skillshare class. Another project is our next Skillshare class. Another project is like a video that I'm working on that requires quite a lot of research about investing. So that's a project. And so that's 1 level higher. It is 1 horizon higher than just the ground level of reply to this email, do this thing, write this script. Horizon 2, so ground level, horizon 1, horizon 2. Horizon 2 is areas of focus and responsibility. And so these aren't really projects because projects usually have a deadline or a finishing time. These are essentially balls that we want to keep in the air basically throughout our whole life. So in my context, that's things like the house. That would be one area. It would be things like my YouTube channel. That's another area. It would be things like my business on the side. A third area. Number 4, relationships, a general area that I want to keep up. If you're a parent, one of your areas might be Johnny. That's the name of your son, and all the stuff associated with that. It's like, so it's not quite projects, but often projects will fit into one of these areas of responsibility. So we've got ground level, we've got projects, we've got areas. Then horizon number 3 is goals and general objectives. These goals can be personal or they can be professional. Goals is a bit of a gray area. We'll talk more about that in the goals section in this class. But essentially, we're kind of asking ourselves, like, where do we actually want to be going? What's the point? And based on our goals, we might be generating projects accordingly. So for example, one of my goals is to become a Gymshark athlete. And to become a Gymshark athlete, i.e. an influencer working for Gymshark, the gym clothing brand, I'll need to get more hench myself, start eating better, and start sharing more content online about kind of fitness and health and all that kind of stuff. So while becoming a Gymshark athlete is a goal, it's not feasible for me to work towards becoming a Gymshark athlete because it's just got way too many components. And so I will split that up into different projects, and those projects will have different actions, and then I'll kind of know what I have to be doing to get there. Horizon number 4 is the 3 to 5 year vision. Again, bit of a gray area. I'm not too much of a fan of thinking so long term, but we'll talk more about that in the later video. And then horizon number 5 is principles and purpose. Like, what are you on this earth to achieve? What do you want to get done? What value do you want to add to the world? What sort of person do you want to be? Kind of the very, very kind of high level overview of what you want from your life. And so those are the 6 horizons of focus that David Allen talks about. And I think even if we're not really going to use them, well, we're going to use projects and actions and areas and stuff. Even if we don't care about the more abstract ones, I think it's generally useful to understand them, because in our role of being the pilot, we want to make sure that we're not just kind of mindlessly going after task after task after task. We actually do want to step back a little bit and think about what's the point. And often I find, especially when I'm talking to students, they're like, it can be very easy to get tunnel visioned into a mode of thinking, oh, I just have to prepare for this next exam and then this next assignment and this next essay and this next exam, without really taking a step back and thinking, okay, why do I think all of this is necessary? What is the game that I'm playing? What are the victory conditions of that game? And am I enjoying the journey as I go along? So I think it's kind of helpful to understand those concepts. There's much more in the book, Getting Things Done, if you want to read more about those. And David Allen has loads of stuff on his blog, which we'll link in the video description, where you can read more about these horizons of focus. And so in the next few videos, we're going to talk about the actionable components that you as the pilot, in our productivity equation, in our system, we as the pilot, we can take to kind of become more productive in setting our short, medium, and long-term direction as the pilot. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so let's start on the ground level of projects and actions that we need to get done. And the main tip for productivity here is to schedule things or use a calendar appropriately. This is very basic. If you're already using a calendar and you're familiar with the art of scheduling, you don't need to watch this video because it'll be just repetition of stuff you already know. Although feel free to watch anyway, because maybe you'll pick up something new or interesting. And often we might have this misconception that if we set rules and schedules, then that's just not a fun way to work, or that we're limiting our creativity and stuff like that. And I've always found that if I want to be productive, if I want to get stuff done, then just scheduling stuff into my calendar makes such a big difference to my day and therefore to the rest of my life. In the previous class about productivity, which you might have seen, we talked about the myth of time and this idea of like, I don't have time, and how that is a complete myth. I like to tell myself I don't have time to go to the gym. But since becoming a productivity guru, I've stopped saying that because I now reframe it as I am choosing not to make the time to go to the gym. If you're saying to yourself, I don't have time to take singing lessons, I don't have time to learn the guitar, that's absolutely not true. You do have time. You're just choosing to do other things with that time, because we all have the same 24 hours in the day. So I think firstly, it's helpful to reframe the time thing as I'm actively choosing not to make the time to do the thing, which just reinforces to us that we actually do have the power and this stuff is within our control. And so there's kind of 2 components of using scheduling properly as a pilot. Firstly, it's understanding what we're actually spending our time on. We are notoriously bad at estimating how much time we actually spend on stuff. For example, there's this fun little study from 2013 that looked at my age group, so 25 to 34-year-olds, and it asked them to estimate how much TV they think they were watching each week. People thought they were watching 15 hours a week of TV, but when they actually measured their TV watching habits, they were watching 28 hours. So that's an absolutely huge discrepancy between what we think we do and what we actually do. And so one way of actually figuring out how much time you have is to just kind of write down what you're doing. You might like to check out a video by my friend and YouTuber colleague, Matt Diavella. He's got a video where for 30 days, he scheduled in his Google Calendar like every single thing he was doing. And that really helped him figure out where the hell his time was going. And so if you're tempted to say, I don't have time to do stuff, then That's kind of exercise number one. Actually see where your time is going. It's enormously helpful. But more importantly, we want to be scheduling stuff into our calendar. And I think probably the single biggest productivity tool, like ignore Notion, Roam, Evernote, all of that stuff, no one cares. Literally the single most important tool is to just have a calendar and use it appropriately. And so for me, my calendar basically dictates my life. As soon as I have any kind of inkling that some kind of event is happening, like, my mum called me up last night and said, this auntie from Birmingham is coming down next weekend for lunch. And so immediately I put that in my calendar because I know if it's not in my calendar, I'm not going to remember it. And, a standard principle in productivity and getting stuff done is understanding that our brain is for having ideas, not for storing them. And so if I'm storing these calendar events in my brain, stuff is going to slip through the cracks. If I'm thinking of stuff I need to get done and I'm not writing it down, stuff is going to slip through the cracks. So scheduling is super important. So that's kind of one aspect of it. It's scheduling important events in your life. I also like scheduling in social events. So for example, this evening at 7 p.m., my friend Sam is coming over and another friend Racer is coming over to visit as well for a takeaway. And so in my calendar, I've got 7 to 11 p.m. hang out with Sam and Racer. Just because it gives me an idea of what's going on in my day. Whereas if I didn't have that and I just sort of had in my head that, oh yeah, at 7 p.m. I'm doing this thing, I actually in the morning when I'm being a pilot and setting my course, it would just be a lot of brain power for me to store all these events in my head. So using a calendar is so fundamentally important. As soon as you find an event, it just goes straight into the calendar. And then the gaps in the calendar are where we can figure out what we want to do. And so in the morning when we're setting our course as being the pilot, that's when I like to create calendar events for stuff that I'm going to be doing that day. So for example, today I had an orthodontist appointment from 2:30 up until about 4 p.m. And so I put that in my calendar. And last night I messaged a friend of mine saying, do you want to grab lunch after the gym? And so I scheduled into my calendar from 11 to 2 p.m. I was going to go gym and have lunch with this friend, which meant that I knew this morning when I woke up at like 8, 9 a.m. that I had this 2-hour window before going to the gym. And then from 4 to 7, because 7 is when Sam's coming over, I've got this other window of time where I can do something like filming this class. And so I've created a calendar event for filming the Skillshare class. And this might seem a little bit excessive, but in the very good book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, which is another staple in the field of productivity, he's got this quote about scheduling. He says that sometimes people ask why I bother with such a detailed level of planning. My answer is simple. It generates a massive amount of productivity. A 40-hour time-blocked work week, I estimate, produces the same amount of output as a 60-plus hour work week pursued without structure. And what he's talking about here is this idea of time blocking, where you block off bits of time in your calendar for certain tasks. And I think if you're struggling with productivity in any sense, then this is just the way to go. I find I can agree with Cal Newport. I feel like I'm more than 50% more productive when I have time blocked and actively scheduled my day. And that doesn't mean I can't change things as they go along. It just means I have a default list of actions that I could be doing. Also in this book, Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky, which is another very good productivity book, they talk about this idea of how if we don't have a default thing in our calendar, what it essentially means is that we are not actually doing anything with that time. And so someone might say, oh, I keep getting distracted. But if you don't have written down in your calendar what you're supposed to be doing anyway, you're not getting distracted from anything, you're just watching Netflix. And so, for example, if I've got in my calendar 4 to 7 p.m. film Skillshare class about productivity, and then I get distracted, at that point, my brain knows I'm getting distracted from doing this thing that I should be doing. Whereas if I have a complete gap in my calendar, 4 to 7 p.m., and I end up just sitting on the sofa and browsing Instagram, I'm not actually distracting myself from anything because I haven't got written down what I should have been doing. So I might be laboring the point a bit excessively, but this scheduling thing is just so important. What I do first thing in the morning, I like to schedule bits of my day and figure out when I'm going to do the stuff that actually needs to get done. And final point, like I said, the schedule doesn't have to be restrictive. It doesn't mean that I absolutely have to film this class from 4 to 7 p.m. Let's say a friend just knocks on my door and says, hey, do you want to grab tea or something? I'm not going to say no, actually, because in my calendar, I've got 4 to 7 p.m. time blocked. I'm going to be like, yeah, sure, come on in. But the point is the schedule is flexible, but having that schedule is super important because it just gives us a default thing that we could be doing with our time. If you're wondering what app to use for calendars, it really doesn't matter. I use Fantastical personally. It's a bit expensive. It's got a subscription. You don't need that. The calendar app you use really doesn't matter as long as you're using some kind of calendar app. The default Google or iOS calendar works fine. Google Calendar on the web, basically all calendar apps are the same and they all work perfectly well. And so we just need to be using some kind of calendar to schedule our time. So actionable task for this video, if you're not currently using a calendar, please download a calendar app and start using it. It takes a bit of practice, but I've been using my calendar religiously since 2013. And I don't know how I lived before without it. Now, I literally schedule everything and it's great. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so in the last video, we talked about how having a calendar is the single most important productivity app. I would argue that the second most important productivity app is having some kind of to-do list manager. If you want, you can use paper to-do lists, but the apps these days are just so good. It doesn't really matter what app you use. You can use Apple Reminders, you can use Google Keep, you can use To-Do, you can use Todoist, you can use Things. I personally quite like using Things if I'm working on personal stuff. I quite like using Todoist if it's more team-based stuff because it's more cross-platform and I can use it with my team. But the main thing is we need to have some kind of app to manage our projects and manage our actions or tasks for those projects. And the reason this is in our pilot section is because the to-do list dictates what we're gonna do for a given day. And so in the morning, I will have my coffee, do my shower, do my morning pages, and then figure out based on my projects list, my task list, and my calendar, what I need to get done that day. And again, kind of going back to the previous video, I'm gonna time block the various things that I need to do. There's a few things that I like to keep in mind when it comes to to-do lists. The first thing is that I don't actually think of it as a to-do list. I think of my whole thing as a might-do list. And this is another tip from this book, Make Time, very good book, link in the video description if you wanna check it out. I think of my to-do list as a might-do list, i.e. it's a list of all my projects that I've got going and all the tasks associated with them that I've got going, and those are categorized into different areas of responsibility, as we talked about in the Horizons of Focus video. But the reason it's a might-do list is because every day I have the option of what I wanna get done from that list, just based on how life is going and what videos need to come out and whether I'm working that day or whether I've got a shift coming up or anything like that. Back in the day when I used to think of them as a to-do list, I would refrain from adding things to it and like creating a new project and stuff because it would feel like it's kind of weighing on me. But as soon as I started thinking of it as a might-do list, now suddenly I just add projects to it all the time, like anything I'm thinking of. Like yesterday, for example, I met up with a few fans for coffee in Cambridge, and one of them said that I should seriously consider taking salsa dancing lessons. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. I've kind of always wanted to do that. And so I created a project in my to-do list manager of start taking salsa lessons. And it's a might-do list, it's not a to-do list. So that means that every day when I kind of glance through my list of projects, I'll be able to see, oh, okay, what's the stuff that I want to get done today and what's the stuff that I want to get done this week. And I think that way of separating out a to-do list into either things to get done today or things to get done this week, or just things to get done generally, those are the three levels of structure that I quite like. Because when it comes to the stuff I'm getting done today, that's the stuff I'm going to do today, obviously. And then I have a next level, which is stuff I want to get done this week. And so I will usually consult my this week list to figure out what I need to do today. And then everything else on it is completely irrelevant because it can just be done at any time. And I've tried experimenting with more granular levels of detail in the past where I'll plan out kind of what I'm doing today and what I'm doing tomorrow and what I'm doing the day after. But I always found that because life just gets in the way, I was never really able to stick to my plan for what I'm going to get done tomorrow and the day after. So now each morning I refresh my today list and I just kind of decide, here are the things I'm going to get done today, and then I'll add stuff to the list for this week, and then I'll forget about everything else. So it starts off as a might-do list, which is the list of absolutely everything, and then the to-do list is just the stuff that I'm doing today. And because I'm the pilot first thing in the morning, that is what I'm doing after having my coffee and after doing some journaling. I'm figuring out, all right, what are the bits that I actually want to get done today? And again, this kind of takes a little bit of practice to start actually consulting your to-do list and actually start using it as a way of living life. The whole way that I like to think about this productivity stuff is that only in the morning, I'm going to be the pilot. And then the rest of the day, I want to be the plane. I want to be executing easily on the orders of the pilot. Because I think when it comes to productivity, one of the areas in which I used to struggle is when I didn't know what I needed to do. And so I'd get something done and then I'll be like, okay, what do I have to do next? And then I'll have to go back into pilot mode and look at my list and be like, oh, and just that friction would mean that I end up just procrastinating the day away. But ever since I started kind of literally deciding my to-do list and time blocking first thing in the morning, being the pilot, I can now get so much more done because now I'm literally just executing on the orders that I've already said I'm going to do. I don't have to think about it anymore. So that's kind of one way of thinking about a to-do list. There's a few other ways of thinking about it, which you might find helpful. There's one idea, again, from Make Time, which is all about the daily highlight. And that is saying that every single day, we're only going to have one and only one highlight for the day. That highlight can be anything. It can be something you have to get done, like, finish essay that's due in tomorrow. Or it can be something that's going to bring you joy, like, for example, hang out with friends in the evening or something like that. But the point is, our day needs to have some kind of highlight that we absolutely have to get done in that particular day. So that's one way of thinking about a to-do list. And so for me, when I'm deciding what I'm going to do in a day, in my mind, or if I'm making a list on paper, I will write a little H And I will say like one of these is the thing that absolutely has to get done. And everything else is kind of optional. Very rarely do I have multiple things that absolutely have to get done on a given day. And so I'll try and give myself only a single daily highlight. The other strategy that we can use that some people find helpful is called eat the frog. And the frog is the unpleasant bit on your to-do list. The idea is that you want to eat the frog first thing in the morning. So as soon as you've done your being a pilot, the very first thing you want to get done is the frog, the thing that you've been putting off, the thing that's a little bit icky, the thing that you really don't want to do. Because if you just bash through and tackle that first thing in the morning, then it'll get done and then you'll be so happy for the rest of the day. And actually there's a quote from Mark Twain who this idea is from. He says, "If the first thing you do each morning is to eat a live frog, you can go through the day with the satisfaction of knowing that it's probably the worst thing that's going to happen to you all day long." And so for me, the highlight of the day, the daily highlight, is the task I absolutely have to get done. But the frog is the most unpleasant task of the day. And sometimes they're the same, but oftentimes they're not. Depending on how I'm feeling, either I will tackle my daily highlight first thing, or I will tackle the frog. The frog is usually something like reply to this email, because I always have like a real sense of when I'm having to reply to emails. No offense if anyone's tried to email me. And so often like replying to an important email will be the very first thing on my list so I can eat the frog. And then I'll do my daily highlight. I'll schedule in my daily highlight to do at some point during the day. The final thing about to-do lists is that when we're setting our plan for the day, we don't want to overcommit. We don't want to do too many things. One way of thinking about this is the 1-3-5 rule, which is that you have 1 big task, 3 medium tasks, and 5 small tasks. And that adds up to 9. And that's still quite a lot of things to get done in a day. But it's very tempting. Like I'm certainly very tempted to be like, oh, film a video about this, film like 8 videos today, because filming a video only takes half an hour. So, you know, if I film 8 videos, that'll only take 4 hours. That never, ever, ever ends up happening. Usually I can just film 1, maybe 2 videos in a day, because it's usually such a big kind of mental endeavor to actually film a video. So the 1-3-5 rule is kind of helpful. But to be honest, what I just keep in mind is that I kind of want my day to be relatively chill. I want to do high leverage things. And that means filling up my today to-do list with like a load of stuff that I can't be bothered with is not particularly helpful. So I try and keep the list kind of small. I keep in mind the daily highlight, and I keep in mind the concept of eating the frog. And that is how I personally deal with to-do/my to-do lists. So action point, if you don't yet have a to-do list system set up, then please make one, because it will change your life. It can be on paper if you like. I prefer to use apps. The one I'm using these days is Things, which is Mac only. Otherwise, literally any to-do list app works. They're all the same. They all basically do the same thing. So don't worry about the apps. The apps are fairly, trivial, fairly unimportant. But yeah, to-do list, super important. Second only to a calendar. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, so we're still in the pilot section where we're trying to set our course for the rest of the day. And we've talked about the short-termy things that we can be doing, which is scheduling and to-do lists. Let's talk in this video about projects and areas. Now, David Allen, in his book, Getting Things Done, which, as I said, is the Bible on productivity and what we should all be reading at some point in our lives, he defines a project as anything that has more than one task associated with it. So, for example, filming this Skillshare class is definitely a project because there are loads and loads of tasks associated with it. Also, something like producing a certain YouTube video about how to get started with investing in the stock market. That would be a project because there are multiple tasks associated with it. Number one, it involves writing, then editing, and then sending the script for review, and then fact checking, and then filming the video, and then editing the video, and then publishing the video. Those are all multiple tasks within the same project. And so with that very broad definition of what a project is, most of us will have somewhere between 10 and 100, probably more towards the 100 section, depending on how complicated you like to live your life. And the main point in thinking in terms of projects is that it gives us a mindset shift, because people who are less pro at productivity will think about doing a project, but that's not really a thing. Like if I were to think of, I need to do the Skillshare class, it's never ever gonna get done because it's actually got like 100 different steps, 100 different tasks within the project of doing the Skillshare class. Equally, something like study for my chemistry exam is a project, it's not a task. But if we think about studying for chemistry, it's not a thing we can wrap our minds around because it's a project, not a task. A task needs to be immediately actionable and ideally have some kind of deadline to it. So revise for chemistry exam would be a project, but revise chapter 1, revise chapter 2, revise chapter 3, revise chapter 4, active recall, chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4, spaced repetition, active recall, chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are 12 different tasks. And so when we're making our plan for a given day, we want to be thinking about doing the tasks rather than doing the projects. Like it would be a lot easier for me to say, I'm going to sit down and revise chapter 1 in chemistry than it is for me to say, I'm going to sit down and revise chemistry. So the more specific we can make our task, the more likely we are actually to get it done. And so for example, for filming the Skillshare class, the project is create Skillshare class about productivity. But the specific task for today is film the first 5 videos in that class, which is in the pilot section. And I have been procrastinating, between you and me, I've been procrastinating from filming this class for the last like 3 months. And it's only today that I've decided to break it down into tasks rather than think of it as like a whole mountain that I have to climb, that I've actually started to do it. The other main reason for having a long ass list of projects that we're working on is that when we are doing our engineering thingy, more on that later, essentially what we have to do is we have to make sure that every single project has an appropriate next action. Because there's no point having a project on the project list that doesn't have a next action, because the action is the thing that we're going to be doing, or the task, not the project itself. And benefit number 3 of maintaining a projects list is that it helps use the concept of the slow burn, which is something that I learned in the Building a Second Brain online course by Tiago Forte, link in the video description if you fancy checking that out. But essentially, there's kind of 2 ways of thinking about getting stuff done. There is the heavy lift, and then there is the slow burn. The heavy lift would be something like, all right, Ali, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna film all 18 videos in the Skillshare class in a single day. It's all gonna get done. It's a very heavy lift. It requires a lot of work. But the slow burn is more like, I've got these 8 different projects on the go, and occasionally over the course of days or weeks or even months, I'm just gonna kind of add stuff to them as and when I have ideas, and I can kind of slowly work on them. So for example, right now we've got a projects list of like 8 more Skillshare classes that we're working on, me and my team. And for me, as I have random moments in the day, so for example, if I'm at work and there's like a spare 20 minutes, I will open up Notion and I'll start adding more bits to one of them. And it just helps kind of slow burn. It means that when I get down to finalizing the structure of one of these classes and then getting down to filming it, then I can do the heavy lift. But actually the class has been cooking on the slow burner for the last like 3 months. And so it's a lot easier to do then than it is just doing the heavy lift. And so the benefit of maintaining this projects list is that we can kind of just slow burn stuff as we're going along, but it also means that we end up doing background processing on the projects. And so that's why I really like having a list of all my current video ideas, because I will randomly find that while I'm in the shower or in the car or at the gym or whatever, I will just have an idea for one of them. And I'll just be like, oh, cool, I've had this idea. Let me write it down in Notion in my relevant kind of information section for the project. But if I didn't have an up-to-date projects list, I wouldn't be doing any kind of background processing on them because I just wouldn't know what I have to get done. People who play postal chess often talk about this. They're like, you play postal chess, you receive a move from your opponent and you're like, okay, what's going on? And then when you're sleeping on it, your brain is doing background processing, and then the next morning the move comes to your head. As weird as it sounds, I've really found that to be true for my YouTube channel and for all the other projects that I'm working on as well. As long as I have them written down somewhere, at some point, I will be doing some level of background processing on them, which is why I'm so bullish on everyone just kind of having an up-to-date list of projects that you're working on. So up-to-date list of projects, project being defined as something that has more than one action, and then making sure that every single project has a viable next action associated with it. In terms of apps, because everyone loves talking about apps, like I said, the one that I use is Things, but basically every single to-do list manager has some way of defining a project, and then you can break that project up into separate tasks. So again, it really doesn't matter which app you're using. And just to wrap up, kind of the next level up, as we talked about in our Horizons of Focus video, is the areas of focus or areas of responsibility. And so often what I'll do is I will categorize my projects within areas. And again, Things and Todoist and stuff lets you do that kind of separation. So for example, project like, get 6-pack abs, which would be a project, would be under the health section of my life. Or something like Film Skillshare class would be a project which would be under the business section, which would kind of be the area. So areas of responsibility, a long list of projects, which are kind of mostly within those areas, and then a longer list of next action steps for each of those projects. And just having that lets us do slow burning, it lets us do background processing. And it means that when we are being our pilot at the start of the day, or when we're doing a weekly review, more on that later, we can look through our projects list and then we can close any open loops that might be open and that needs closing, but we'll talk more about that in one of the future videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Alrighty, let's talk about goals, which is another one of David Allen's Horizons of Focus. And I'm not really a massive fan of goals, if I'm being honest. The traditional advice about goals is that you should have a list of goals, and they should be SMART, SMART. It should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. I think that's what it stands for. I feel like goals are a bit pointless, right? For a few different reasons. So firstly, kind of a philosophical point, like what is the point? There is a nice quote that I like from one of my favorite authors, Brandon Sanderson, which is one of the ideals of the Knights Radiant, which is like this order of like warriors and stuff. And their kind of mantra is life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. And I really like that last one, journey before destination. I think when we have goals, it encourages too much of a reliance on the destination and a lot less focus on the journey. And so that's one reason why I don't like goals. Secondly, I don't like goals because when you hit a goal, then what happens? You get a momentary burst of dopamine for like 2 seconds. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, that's it. I guess I move on to the next goal. And that's why I don't like setting goals for subscribers or views or revenue or anything like that, because the goalpost just shifts. Then as soon as you hit it, you've got the hedonic adaptation, you adapt, and then you end up, just moving the goalpost even further along. But having said that, I am open to changing my mind on the goal stance. And when I was doing an interview with one of my new internet friends, Noah Kagan, who I've long admired and been listening to his podcast for ages, we talked about the 3 different types of goals. And I think this might be a legit way of looking at the idea of goal setting. So we will include that clip over here.
I've kind of observed 3 systems of setting goals. And I think each of them can work. So I think there's the object-oriented goal, which is, what is my objective, right? So I want 1 million subscribers. So for AppSumo, our company, we have a revenue goal. We want to get X millions of dollars in revenue this year. Very objective. And you'd sometimes have to have a destination. Mexico, revenue goal. So then I think there are progress goals. So a progress goal is, so another example is like my mailing list. So like sendfox.com/Noah, my mailing list. I don't care if I get one new, and what's important about goals is they have to matter to you. So a progress goal is, I don't care if I get 1 new active subscriber a month or 1,000. It doesn't change for me the value. So a progress goal to me is it progressing? If I get 5, I'm happy. If it's negative, I'm not. And so that's a progress goal. And the last one is the system goal. So a system goal is, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. That's it. That's my system. There's not a progress, but I will be there 3 times a week. And so I think each of those goals work in different scenarios and different things. So I wouldn't say absolutely that 37 signals is wrong. I think in business, I think you have to kind of know how things are performing or progressing. So we generally do our whole system in there. We call it a GMO. But I think there's other goals where you don't want to have that. Because for me, like YouTube, if right now I'm at 50,000, and if I said I want 100,000, honestly, it would kill my motivation. And I don't care if I get 100,000 or if I get 51,000. I'm just enjoying what I'm doing. So it's more of like, all right, I want to put out 3 videos a week or 2 videos, whatever that is. And each one is a different tool at a different time.
So those were the 3 types of goals. I quite like the system goals and I quite like the progress goals. The system goals for me are like, make 3 YouTube videos a week. That's all I care about. I don't look at the numbers behind it in the slightest, and I try not to let them affect me. And I quite like the progress goals as well, which is like, in general, it's nice if the YouTube channel is growing rather than declining. That is kind of a goal, but the specific numerical aspects of it don't really matter to me in the slightest. The other thing about goals is that I like setting goals where achieving those goals is within my control. Like, it's entirely within my control to release 3 YouTube videos every week, because that's just based on me and my team and kind of the effort that we're putting in. But if our goal was to produce 3 videos a week that have at least 100,000 views, that is now a goal that is outside of our control. We can produce the 3 videos a week, but there is absolutely, it's not within our control whether or not they get 100,000 views each. And so I think having a numerical goal in that kind of sense, at least for me personally, I'm not a fan of it, because it encourages this sort of thinking where we're reliant on metrics and we're trying to work to hit something. And in a way, our self-worth gets defined by an externality rather than by our internal processes. So yeah, I mean, people say that having goals is useful. Maybe for you, having a goal will be helpful. I like what James Clear says about goals, obviously, because I never have any original ideas. James Clear says that having a goal is fine, provided you use that goal to set your direction, but then you want to completely forget about the goal. Like, let's say my goal was to run a marathon. I would use that goal to set the direction and figure out what my daily plan is going to be for my training. But then I would forget about the fact that I'm trying to run a marathon. And instead I'd focus on the system of just kind of progressively building up my running stamina every single day. And there's another nice quote from a US football coach called Bill Walsh, which is that the score takes care of itself. And I think that as long as you're focusing on the right things, so for me in the context of videos, it's kind of just churning out 3 videos a week and trying to make them good. As long as I'm doing that, I actually don't need to worry about the numbers, because the score will just by default take care of itself. So that's my thought on goals. David Allen would probably disagree. He'd probably say you should have a load of goals, but hey, each to their own. Try it out, see if goals work for you. But if not, it's totally fine. And I'll put some links in the video description to other resources that I found helpful in thinking about goals. In particular, I really like this blog post, which we'll put over here, from a guy called Jason Fried, who is one of the co-founders of Basecamp, which is a US software company. And he talks about, I think it's called, I've Never Had a Goal. And that really resonated with me when I first read it. So that's my stance on goals. Kind of helpful if you're trying to be a pilot, but maybe thinking more about progress and about system goals rather than numerical goals. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so final video in the pilot section, and in this one we're talking about vision and purpose. Now this might seem a little bit too abstract, and I always kind of used to think that people would say, oh, what's your vision? What's your purpose in this world? And I used to be like, look, man, come on. I'm just focused on getting through one day to the next. But I've got to admit, recently I've started to think a lot more about vision and purpose. Because in a way, the pilot is not just responsible for setting the things that we're doing for a given day. The pilot is also generally responsible for making sure that the productivity that we're doing is generally useful over time. And because, going back to our equation, productivity equals useful output divided by time multiplied by F, we want to make sure it's useful. And so we want to make sure the stuff that we're doing is actually in line with some kind of wider vision. And I think often one of the reasons why we are unproductive is because we don't see the bigger picture. It's really hard to convince a 12-year-old secondary school student that, mate, you've got to do your homework. And I was like, why? Because it'll help you get better grades. Why does that matter? Because then you'll get to a better university. Why does that matter? Because then you'll get a better job. Why does that matter? Because then you'll be happier. The causality starts to really break down the further along that spectrum that you go. And so at some point we do want to be thinking about what is a wider vision? What's a wider purpose? Where do we get the meaning in life? Obviously, this is the $1 million question. People have tried answering it over the years. There's a very good book by Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was imprisoned in a concentration camp for a long time. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about, how people found meaning in the most trying of circumstances. And essentially, my understanding of his thesis is that he says that a lot of meaning comes from having responsibility towards something that's greater than ourselves. So apparently, parents get meaning from their children because the children are a responsibility that they have to do. People get a sense of meaning by being part of their local church or by setting up a business or by kind of being recognized for having responsibility at work. There's all sorts of different sources of meaning in our life. So that's one way of thinking about the question. The other interesting way of thinking about this question is something called the Odyssey Plan. This is apparently an exercise that they give to Stanford Business School students. I discovered this from a video on my friend Unjaded Jade's YouTube channel. And I did this exercise and it really kind of sort of changed the way that I was thinking about my life. So the idea of the Odyssey Plan is that you ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is, in 5 years' time, what would my life look like if I continued down exactly the same path? And you would kind of write in detail, kind of this day, 5 years from now, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? Who's in your life? What are you doing in your life? That sort of thing. And after you've written kind of a few paragraphs about that, the next question is, now imagine in 5 years' time, what would your life look like if you took a completely different path? And write down in detail what that might look like. And then the final question in the Odyssey Plan is, in 5 years' time, what would your life look like if money was no object and if societal expectations didn't matter at all? And then you write down what kind of your life looks like then. And that was an interesting exercise for me because it made me realize that the path that I was on when I did the exercise, which was December 2019, it made me kind of realize that the path that I was on led to a point where at the end of it, I was kind of is this it? I imagined myself continuing to live in Cambridge and continuing to work part-time in medicine as an anesthetics trainee, anesthetics registrar, doing teaching on the side. And I kind of just had a sense of, it just didn't seem particularly exciting. Kind of without questioning that before, for the last few years, I just kind of assumed that would be where my life would go, that I would end up living in Cambridge forever and, supervising at a college and that kind of stuff. But it was only doing this exercise that made me realize that maybe this isn't quite the vision and purpose that I want for my life. So I don't know, it might sound a little bit wishy-washy, might sound a bit abstract, but I think it's very interesting. Every single person I know who has actually tried the Odyssey Plan exercise has found it to be eye-opening in some way or another. So that's another way of answering the question of vision and purpose. Another way is by doing the deathbed exercise, which is where you ask yourself, let's say I were to die 1 year from now, how would I change? What would I do differently? Then you ask yourself, what if I were to die 2 years from now? What if I were to die 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I'm not a huge fan of the 1 year from now because the 1 year from now makes us focus on very short-term thinking. But I like thinking about it in terms of 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years because I think I'm 26 right now. If I were to die at the age of 28, then, okay, interesting. I probably wouldn't just piss away the next 2 years. I'd probably want to do something somewhat productive, but that would give me some kind of idea as to what I want my wider mission or purpose in life to actually be. because otherwise thinking about it in too long a time horizon makes it really hard to actually think about. So I quite like the 2-year variety of that question. A fourth way of thinking about this, people have tried to answer this question over the years, and I find that the more frames we have for answering it, the easier it becomes to actually think about. Another way of thinking about it is by splitting life up into the only bits that matter. And I think those are like 4 things. That's physical health, number 1. Number 2, mental health / happiness / fulfillment, as like a bucket. Number 3, relationships. And number 4, money, material stuff, making sure we have food, making sure we have a house, like a roof over our heads, that kind of stuff. And so if we think about those 4 domains, one way of thinking about the mission purpose in life is to kind of optimize for those 4 and think, okay, how do I make sure that I'm kind of 100% on all those four domains: physical health, mental health, relationships, and material stuff. And then once you've got that sorted, at that point, you can start thinking even harder. And so for me, ever since I first read The 4-Hour Workweek, when I think I was 17 years old, my guiding principle, my guiding North Star, my guiding vision purpose has always been this idea of creating multiple streams of passive income with the ultimate goal of work being optional. And, by the grace of God, I'm now at the point where work is optional and I don't have to go to work if I don't want to. And that's like a really nice position to be. But it's also the North Star that I've been chasing for the last 9 years of my life. And so now I'm at that point. The next question I have to think is, okay, damn, continuing to chase more sources of passive income probably isn't the path to leading a happy and meaningful and productive life. I now have to start thinking a lot more about, what do I actually want to achieve? What value do I want to add to the world? What do I want to get done? Still haven't figured it out. It's a lifelong ongoing endeavor. But given that productivity is about useful output over time, and given that in 10% of the time we are actually being the pilot, i.e. setting the course for our lives and for the day, I think it is important that we occasionally take a step back and think, what is all of this in service of? What is the point of being productive? What is the point of studying for our exams? What is the point of trying to go to the gym? What are we actually optimizing for? What is the game that we're playing, and what are the victory conditions of that game? So just a few thoughts there. Haven't figured it out. Don't think anyone really has, but hopefully that's kind of helpful. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so we've talked about the role of the pilot, which, kind of going back to our productivity equation, productivity equals useful output divided by time multiplied by F. The pilot is the thing that sets the useful aspect of it, and maybe we should spend around about 10% of our time being the pilot, figuring out our course, planning out our day, planning out a week, planning out a month and year, making sure our project list is up to date, all of that good stuff. Let's now talk about the plane. And the plane is probably the most important part because we are the plane. Probably around 85% of the time is what I would tentatively suggest. And as we know by now, the job of the plane is to simply execute on the orders of the pilot. We do not want to think too hard about what we're doing when we're the plane, because hopefully we've already established that in the morning when we've done our piloting, we've set our course for the day. But unfortunately, while the plane is making up the bulk of our time, the plane is also usually the bit where most people struggle when it comes to productivity. So the plane has 3 functions. The plane needs to take off, safely. The plane needs to stay the course and not get distracted along the way. And the plane needs to land safely as well. The landing one is a little bit less important, but like taking off and staying the course are like the 2 fundamental features or functions or things the plane has to do. Unfortunately, those are also the 2 things that most people struggle with the most. Taking off, for example, is always an issue because we feel we don't have the motivation to take off. And then staying the course and not getting distracted is always an issue because we have our phones that get in the way and distract us. And, I always get emails being like, oh, how do you stay focused and how do you not get distracted? So those are like, the 2 important things that most people struggle with in terms of productivity. It's a constant struggle. I also still struggle to get started. I still struggle to not get distracted. Partly, one way of doing that is while I'm filming this, I've actually got the phone underneath me, which is filming an Instagram live, which helps keep me motivated to actually continue filming this class, even though at the moment I just want to go and do a wee-wee. Anyway, in this section of the course, we're going to talk about techniques, actionable strategies, actionable practical advice, and how we can become more effective planes, and how we can take off and not get distracted and land appropriately in a more safe and interesting fashion. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so when we're trying to be the plane, the biggest issue most of us have is that we have trouble taking off. So we have trouble sitting down and actually doing the work that we have to get done. There's a few different reasons for this. The first one is that we misunderstand the concept of motivation and what motivation is. Often the way we think about it is that we need motivation to get something done, but that's actually the exact opposite of how motivation works. The way it works as Jeff Hayden talks about in the motivation myth, and as I've talked about in a previous Skillshare class and YouTube video, which I'll be linking down in the video description, essentially the way it works is that we do something and then we get a small success, and then that leads to the motivation to continue doing the thing. So action leads to success, which leads to motivation, which sustains action, rather than motivation leads to action and whatever. And so we have motivation the wrong way around. Step one of taking off appropriately is understanding that this whole motivation thing is a little bit screwed up. In an ideal world, we would just get the thing done. You know, the slogan for Nike, just do it. We would just do it in an absolutely ideal world. But unfortunately, in the real world, we still struggle with motivation. And usually the thing that we struggle with motivation for is that we struggle to find the motivation when the thing that we're doing has a long-term benefit, but has a short-term pain. And our brain is always going to try and minimize short-term pains because evolutionarily, that was how we succeeded and survived and stuff, by like avoiding pain in the short term. But evolutionarily, we didn't really need to thrive in the long term in terms of our career and work and professional relationships and stuff like that. And so we need to kind of hack our brains to actually do the thing. And there's a few different ways that we can access that. But instead of me just talking about it, I'm just going to insert the bit from the previous video where I've talked about it with the diagram and everything. If you've seen my previous class about productivity, or you understand the concept that motivation is a myth and all the different areas in which we can target motivation to increase our chances of taking off, then feel free to skip this video because this is just repetition. But in case you haven't seen it, in case you're not familiar with this general concept, here is me talking about motivation from the past. So let's say we want to, for me, it's, the thing that I struggle with is going to the gym. But for a lot of students who tend to be most of my audience, it tends to be sitting down to study for the exam. So you would start with the thought, right? So the thought would be something like, I should study. That would be the thought that, crosses it into our mind. And at some point, we would get potentially the action, which is, actually studying and sitting down and opening the books, or using Anki, or using the retrospective revision timetable. I've got a whole Skillshare class on this actually about how to study for exams. Link in the video description. You can check it out. It's very good, if I say so myself. Anyway, we start off with the thought of I should study, and then at some point we might get to the action of actually studying. And partly the whole point of the productivity thing and like watching a class like this is you want to get from the thought to the action, ideally without too much problem in between. But actually the thing that loads of us struggle with, and I did a poll on my Instagram story where I asked, what are your productivity woes? And like 2,000 people replied to this poll. And at least half the answers was something to do with, I really struggle to get started. I really struggle to find the motivation to do the thing that I know I should do. Like we know we should study, but the actual studying, we tend not to do. So why is that? Well, there's a few different reasons for it, but the word motivation comes into here now. And the word motivation comes in between the thought and the action. So motivation would be sort of the middleman. And what is motivation? Motivation is the feeling of wanting to do something. Like I feel like studying. So we've got I should study, then the motivation bit is I feel like studying, and then the studying bit, then the action bit is actually doing the studying. And actually, more accurately, it's probably I feel like studying right now. We all study when we feel like it. We all watch Netflix when we feel like it. We all play sports or hang out with our friends, or watch videos on YouTube when we feel like it. But that's where the motivation comes in. We think we have to feel like doing the thing before we do the thing. And so thought goes to motivation, which goes to action, is kind of the traditional procrastinator's, non-productive person's view of the motivation equation. But the whole point of this class is to make us more productive. Going back to our actual productivity equation, productivity equals useful output over time multiplied by the fun factor. But in order to actually get the output bit, we actually have to get started. And that is where the motivation equation comes in. And that's where we have a problem. Going back to our pilot, plane, and engineer analogy, it's all very well, being the pilot and setting my course that today I'm going to get 5 of my subjects of chemistry done, or today I'm going to prepare for that physiology supervision that I'm giving later this day. It's all very well setting that course as the pilot. But then as the actual plane, we all struggle to take off. We struggle to actually get the plane off the ground, actually sit down and do the work. Because we think about motivation in this way. And this is the wrong way to think about motivation. This is a myth. So motivation is a myth. Instead, in an ideal world, what would actually happen is that we would have the thought, right? I should study. And that would directly lead to the action regardless of how we are feeling. Motivation is fundamentally a feeling. And relying on our feelings as a way of setting our course in life and getting what we need to do done is a recipe for disaster, because feelings are temporary, feelings are fleeting, feelings don't last for very long, they're transient. Take all the synonyms for fleeting that you want. Feelings are temporary, they're unreliable. Our feelings change moment to moment, depending on the time of day, depending on the time of month, depending on the time of year, depending on what's going on in our lives. Feelings are not a reliable way to get anything done. Instead, we should just have the thought and we should go to action. And some people might describe that thing as discipline. When you have discipline, you go directly from thought to action, regardless of how you're feeling. And if we want to be more productive, this is the secret, if there is a secret, of getting started with anything. It's recognizing that motivation is a myth. We don't need motivation. All we need is the thought and the action. And through discipline, through willpower, whatever you want to call it, from the thought, we lead to the action. Now, there's a great post on a random website called Wiz Domination. I haven't read much of the stuff on this website. I've tried, but it's not really my thing. But they've got a fantastic post called Screw Motivation, What You Need is Discipline. And this was the post that I read years and years ago. And when I first came across this, it genuinely blew my mind, because it was the first time I'd seen the motivation equation sort of in this sort of context, that motivation is the thing in between thought and action. And actually, we should just use discipline to go all the way. And they say on the website, which is, I'll sort of paraphrase the quote. They say that motivation relies on the erroneous assumption that we need to feel like doing the thing that we're doing before we actually do it. They also say on the website, a 3-year-old does what it feels like doing. An adult does what an adult knows it should, or an adult does his duty or her duty. A 3-year-old does what they feel like. An adult does what they need to do. And when we're thinking about productivity and when we're thinking about getting stuff done, we want to act like the adults here. We don't want to be a slave to our 3-year-old self. I think Tim Urban, the guy behind the Wait But Why blog, has a good mental model for this. He's got a very good talk about the procrastinator's dilemma and like inside the mind of a master procrastinator. And he talks about how in our minds, we've got this 3-year-old kind of little baby that's like, wailing for attention and relying on its feelings. And I need to feel like doing this thing, otherwise I'm not going to do it. And like the main reason why we love watching stuff about improving our productivity, the objective is to quash that 3-year-old so that it's irrelevant. And actually we do what the adult inside us wants us to do, which is the thought of I should study, or for me, I should go to the gym. I personally don't really have any problems with studying because I quite enjoy it. And that ties into our whole fun thing, the fun factor. The fun factor bleeds into all aspects of the productivity equation, because if we can enjoy what we're doing, we don't need motivation for it anymore. Like, when was the last time you said, I need motivation to watch Netflix? You really don't. We need to do motivation. And in fact, like, usually we only need motivation to do the things that are short-term painful and long-term useful. Yeah. So for me, it's things like going to the gym, short-term pain, long-term useful. Stretching, short-term pain, long-term useful. Eating healthily, learning how to cook. These sorts of things where it's potentially unpleasant in the moment, but I know it's going to lead to greater rewards further down the line. And there's a few different problems with this. And understanding where these problems are allows us to target the interventions to kind of hack our motivation. So we've kind of talked about the theory of it. Let's now go into some practical tips. Essentially, there's two aspects of the equation that we can target. There is the action itself, and then there's the outcome. And usually the problem with things that require motivation is usually that the outcome is a long time in the future. We don't have a very good feedback loop. If, for example, I went to the gym one day and immediately I saw an increase in the size of my biceps, I would be going to the gym every day, right? We all would, because the feedback loop is immediate. We get that reward, we get that dopamine hit. And as the author of The Motivation Myth, which is a very good book, says, success leads to motivation, which leads to success, which leads to motivation. We start off with these little successes, and that makes us become more motivated. So if we see the success of I did a bicep curl and my bicep increased in size, I'm like, yes, I automatically look better. Then of course I'd be doing bicep curls all day, every day, because I can see the successes. But usually we need motivation for the things where the feedback loop is significantly longer. For example, like healthy eating. It's so hard to lose weight because we don't see, we deprive ourselves of that, McDonald's drive-through. This is something that I struggle with a lot. Back when McDonald's was open, prior to the lockdown, depending on when you're watching this. We would deprive ourselves of the chips and immediately we would lose weight. If the feedback loop were that tight, no one would have a problem with keeping weight down. But we do, because the feedback loop is too long. So I've rambled on long enough. Basically, there's a few different ways we can target the motivation myth. Number one is focusing on the action, and number two is focusing on the outcome. Now, let's think about the action. And I think there are two ways of dealing with this. Way number one is to make the action more pleasurable, right? So we said that we don't struggle with motivation to watch Netflix. What is it about Netflix that means we don't need motivation to watch it. Well, it's fun. We enjoy watching Netflix. Why do I not struggle with the motivation to study? Because it's fun. I enjoy studying. And so if we can make the action more fun or more pleasurable, as I'm going to write down over here, making the action more pleasurable makes us more likely to do the thing. This is pretty standard stuff. You know, if you enjoy doing something, then you'll just be far more likely to do it. And so for me, the ways that I hack my brain into thinking that I'm enjoying something is by genuinely making it more fun for myself. So for example, when I'm studying, I make sure I've got my Spotify Study With Me playlist in my headphones or my AirPods or in the background or whatever. And yes, the evidence does sort of say that probably studying with music is slightly suboptimal compared to studying in silence. But studying with music, and I've got, you know, Concerning Hobbits or like the Pirates of the Caribbean theme tune or like the Interstellar soundtrack banging in my headphones, that just makes it like 4 times more fun to study. And therefore, I'm more than happy to take that slight hit of efficiency and optimization of my studying and memory and stuff because it's made it fun. It makes it more pleasurable. It means I'm more likely to do it. Equally for me, when I go to the gym, the reason that I fairly regularly go to the gym is because I've made it fun. And the way I've made it fun is by firstly turning it into a game where I track my workouts and every week I try and do better than I did the week before. It kind of turns it into a personal game with myself. I'm not competing against anyone else. I don't really care what that dude over there is benching. What I care about is getting slightly better than the week before. And as soon as I started just tracking the numbers on my gym workouts, suddenly like it just gave me the motivation to go to the gym far more often because it became a game. Equally, when it comes to studying for exams, I turned studying into exams a game that I'm playing with myself. That sounds a bit weird. A game that I'm playing with myself, but that I'm sort of in friendly competition with my friends. Friendly competition in that it's just kind of interesting, kind of like playing a board game. Exams are sort of like playing a board game in that you're sort of competing against your friends, but like in like a friendly sort of way. And so I treat exams like I'm playing a game with myself. I'm trying to get the best mark I can. And oh, it's interesting to see what Paul or Jake or Molly or Catherine or Callum got just because it's kind of fun. So all these things are making it more pleasurable. So step number 1 is if you're struggling with the motivation to do anything, and this is a problem in your life, think very hard about how you can make the action more pleasurable, make it fun for yourself. You know, again, using the example of studying, which is something we all struggle with. I go to different libraries and different coffee shops around Cambridge, and I give myself a budget of like 20, 30 pounds a day. You know, feel free to adjust that depending on how much spare cash you have, in terms of sort of the amount of money I'm allowed to burn on just buying lattes. Because, you know, ordering a latte every 2 hours makes it more pleasurable to study. Taking an Instagram photo from above for the gram makes it more pleasurable. All these things are making studying more pleasurable. Anyway, so we've talked about more pleasurable. The other thing we can target is we can make the consequences of inaction more painful. So what does this mean? So we've all had this thought when, you know, we've got an assignment or an essay or a piece of homework or some presentation at work. We've got that due the following day. And we know that if we don't get it done by tomorrow, we're going to have like, you know, bad things are going to happen. We might fail our exams. We might have to have a meeting with our headmaster. Our boss is going to shout at us. Whatever context you're living in, like we all know what it's like to have a deadline that we're working towards. And usually we get the thing done if we have a deadline. And the reason we get the thing done is because at that point, the consequences of not doing the thing outweigh the pain of actually doing the thing in the first place. So again, thinking about how we can hack the motivation equation, we need to figure out ways in which to make not doing the action more painful. So for example, one really easy way of doing this that almost no one does, but that everyone who tries says it works absolutely wonders, is by putting money on the line. We all hate losing money. There's so much psychological evidence. In fact, we don't even need psychology evidence. We all hate losing money. You know, the pain of losing $100, £100 is far worse than the joy of gaining £100 because of the utility function, because of how our brains work. We all hate losing money. And so there are websites like beminder.com or things like that, where you can literally put money on the line. And if you don't do the thing, then that money disappears. Either it gets donated to charity or it gets donated to the Ku Klux Klan. You know, there's all sorts of different things that we can give our money to that we really don't want our money to go towards. Charity, fair enough. But yeah, putting money on the line is a really easy way of doing it. If I really cared about going to the gym, what I could do and what would absolutely work wonders is I could say to my housemate, Molly, I could say, Molly, here is £5,000. Here's a check for £5,000. If there is a single day this week for the next year that I don't go to the gym, unless I have a very, very good reason, you can cash that check and do whatever you want with the money. All of a sudden, I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I'm making the consequences of inaction very, very painful. I know that if there is a single day where I don't go to the gym without a very, very good reason, Molly's going to cash that check and I'm going to lose £5,000. That's a lot of money for me. That's a lot of money for anyone. And so that would be a very easy way to hack the motivation equation. And so you watching this, if you're really struggling with motivation, if you are really saying to yourself and to others that, oh, I don't have the motivation to study, why not put money on the line? And this is an interesting question because if we think about this, like think about it right now, would you really put, half of your life savings on the line in return for making sure you do the thing? Probably not. And it probably feels like quite an uncomfortable thing to do. Like even thinking about writing Molly a check for £5,000 makes me feel very uncomfortable, even though I know it would make me get the work done. And the reason it's making me feel uncomfortable is probably because I actually don't want to go to the gym that much. I might tell myself, oh, I should go to the gym, blah, 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 blah. But actually, fundamentally, I don't want to. It doesn't actually align with my goals for life to tell Molly that, unless I go to the gym every single day, you can keep the £5,000. So there's different ways of doing this. There's different websites. I'll put some links in the project and resources section, but this is a very easy way to hack our brains into being motivated to do stuff by making the consequences of inaction more painful. Okay, 2 more things. There are 2 things that we can affect with the outcome. So firstly, we can shorten the feedback loop. So that's that example that I took of going to the gym. If suddenly we became much more hench, then the feedback loop would be very short and we would enjoy going to the gym. We as humans, we love short feedback loops. Like that's why playing sports is very pleasurable, because as soon as you've done the action, you see the feedback, you see what's going on, you see the squash ball bouncing off the wall and you think, oh, that was a good shot or that was a bad shot, and you adjust it. We love learning. That's how our brains are wired. And so anything we can do to shorten feedback loops is going to make us more motivated to do the thing. So like I said, the way that I do this, practically speaking, is that everything that I need to do that I don't want to do, I turn it into a game. So for example, with the gym, the feedback loop is no longer how big are my biceps getting. The feedback loop is, have I lifted more weight than I did last week? And that's a short feedback loop. I really try and, bench, what am I benching these days? Like 70 kilograms or something? I really try and bench that 70 kilograms. And the following week, if I can get 72.5 kilograms, that will be a dopamine hit. I'll release some endorphins. I'll feel good about myself. It's a short feedback loop, and therefore I'm more likely to do it. And so whatever you're struggling with motivation-wise, think hard about how do you shorten the feedback loop. The problem with studying for exams, right, is that let's say we're 15 and doing our O-levels or GCSEs or whatever, and like you're thinking, okay, well, I need to do this work because I need to get good grades in my GCSEs because then ultimately that'll help me get into a better university, which I guess sort of will help me get better life outcomes, will make me happier in the long run. Those assumptions break down at various intervals. But the point is, it's a very long feedback loop, especially if we're like really young in secondary school. It's really hard as an 11-year-old in the 7th grade in year 7 in the UK to really get motivated to do your homework, because the thing you're optimizing for is 5 years into the future. Ultimately, it's all about your O-level results, right? That feedback loop is way too long. So if you can turn it into a game, make it more fun, make it more interesting in some way that shortens the feedback loop, that hacks this motivation equation. And finally, another thing that hacks it is making the outcome more salient. So what do I mean by that? So salience is just like sort of making the outcome more clear in our minds. And that's partly why I think students enjoy watching study with me videos or enjoy watching, YouTubers who are at the universities that they want to go to. When I used to make vlogs about life as a Cambridge University medical student, loads of people who wanted to be in that position would watch those videos and feel motivated, feel inspired. And I think the reason for that is that it's increasing the salience of the outcome. If I was a 15-year-old wanting to study medicine at Cambridge and I saw an 18-year-old YouTuber talking about what it's like studying medicine at Cambridge, it would make the outcome much more clear in my mind. And so I could use that as motivation, coming back to motivation, I could use that as motivation to help me do my homework, because I'd know what it's like. I'd see the life of a Cambridge medical student and think, this is what I want. Equally for me, I don't struggle with this sort of thing anymore because, I don't really, there isn't really a lifestyle that I aspire to as such. But for me, the thing that I struggle with is eating healthily and going to the gym. And so watching a YouTuber like Alex Costa, who looks great, is like men's fashion advice, is amazing, his hair is really nice, he's really toned, he's a good looking guy. Watching Alex Costa motivates me to work out more because I see what a six-pack looks like and think, damn, it would be nice to have that six-pack. And therefore increases the salience of the outcome. It makes me more likely to go to the gym. Now, all of these tactics are all based around trying to hack motivation. But as I said, the ideal scenario is that we don't need the motivation in the first place. We scrub the word motivation from our vocabulary and we just rely on discipline. We have the thought and we do the action. In an ideal world, I would not need motivation. I wouldn't need to watch Alex Costa videos or follow Gymshark Instagram accounts. I wouldn't need that to go to the gym in an ideal world. But hey, I'm only human. We're not perfect. I'm trying to get better at this, and it's a muscle that we can all get better at. really trying to scrub the word motivation from our vocabulary and instead relying on discipline to just get us through. We have the thought, we do the action. It's kind of like going to work. I don't need the motivation to go to work. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, even though I'm a doctor, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I really can't be bothered to go to work today. But do I require myself to feel like going to work before going to work? Absolutely not. I'm a professional, I do the job, I get up, I go to work, whether or not I feel like it. And I think for me, if I can treat my physical health and, eating healthy and going to the gym and taking care of my posture, if I can treat those things with the same level of professionalism that I bring to going to work or writing my weekly email newsletter, then my life would become 10 times better, and that would compound so much over the long term. We all need to treat our own interests with as much professionalism as we treat the interests of other people. So yeah, that was why motivation is a myth. So those were some general tips for taking off, for dealing with motivation, kind of related to Newton's first law, which is that an object at rest will continue to stay at rest, and an object moving at a constant velocity will continue to move at a constant velocity unless acted on by an external imbalanced force. So the main thing is that if we can just take off, then we are allowing Newton's first law to work in our favor. And once we have momentum, once we're moving forward, we will just continue to move forward, which is why the hardest part about being productive is actually just getting started at doing the thing. There's a few different ways we can hack our brains into kind of thinking that we're just going to get started. One way is to make the action more pleasurable or to shorten the feedback loop. Another thing we can do that I quite like is the 5-minute rule, where I just convince myself that I'm only going to work on the thing for 5 minutes. So actually earlier today when filming this class, I told myself, you know what, all I'm going to do is film the intro and I'll just take 5 minutes. And now here we are 3 hours later filming the same class because I managed to hack my brain into being productive by just focusing on the starting point. All right, so those were some general thoughts on how to deal with the motivation aspect of it. As we've established, motivation is a myth. Action leads to success, which leads to motivation. Motivation does not lead to action. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so having established the fact that motivation is a myth, which is a repetition of a previous class, and as we talked about in the previous class, one of the most important laws of productivity is Newton's first law, which is actually a physics law, but actually applies to productivity as well. And Newton's first law states that an object at rest will continue to stay at rest, and an object traveling at a constant velocity will continue to travel at that constant velocity unless acted on by an external imbalanced force. So what Newton is saying is that if you are stationary, you will continue to stay stationary. But if you're moving, then you actually don't need any extra force to continue moving. You will just keep on moving. And so the main thing we actually need to do is we just need to get started at doing the thing. We just need our plane to take off. And then the laws of physics, the law of Newton's first law, will carry us forward. And so a big part of being more productive involves hacking our brains somehow to just get started at doing the task. And there's a few different strategies for doing this. I think I've talked about some of these in a previous class, but I'm going to say them again. If you know these already and you don't struggle with taking off, then don't worry, feel free to skip this video, no point in watching it. But essentially the 3 things that I do are the 2-minute rule, the 5-minute rule, and environment design. So the 2-minute rule is from David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. And that basically says that if something is going to take less than 2 minutes, then just do it now. Like, washing up this coffee mug is going to take less than 2 minutes. So I should just do it now, and I would, but I'm in the middle of filming this video right now. And I think the more we apply the 2-minute rule to our lives, the more all these little things around our house just get like completely sorted. Like, replying to an email, if it's going to take less than 2 minutes, there's no point in me adding it to my to-do list because it's just clogging up space on my to-do list. I'm just going to do it right now. It'll take 2 minutes, and then I'll be so much happier. And the more we can apply the 2-minute rule to our lives, the less random crap we actually have to deal with when we're trying to do something productive and just generally more useful. So that was tip number 1. Tip number 2 is something that I call the 5-minute rule. And that is where if I am struggling with getting started with something, like, filming the Skillshare class, I will tell myself, I'm just going to do it for 5 minutes. If I tell myself that and just do the thing for 5 minutes, more often than not, I will just continue doing the thing because that's how Newton's first law works. Once we're moving, we will just continue to stay moving. And so when we say I struggle with procrastination, usually what we mean is I struggle with getting started. So if we can just target all of our willpower, all of our discipline, all of our interventions at just getting started by things like the 5-minute rule, then procrastination becomes completely eliminated and we can become productivity grease monkeys if that's what you want to do. And finally, the third point is about environment design. There's a quote that I like, which I think I came up with, which is that friction is the most powerful force in the universe. And so if there's any friction to doing the thing that you need to get done, it's basically not going to happen. So for example, if I need to sit down and work, but my desk is untidy, I'm basically not going to sit down and work. And so I need to design my environment in a way that's friction-free. For example, setting up this camera Before I went to the gym earlier today, I went to the gym and then I planned in the morning when I was being a pilot, I planned to film these videos between 4 and 7 p.m. But I recognized, using the principle of environment design, that I should set up the camera, the light, and the microphone, and the recorder, and everything. I should have it all ready so that as soon as I get back from the gym, I can just sit down and start filming. Because if I didn't have any of this stuff ready, if I would have had to set up the camera, the lights, and everything, I would not be sitting here filming this right now because the friction to sitting down and doing the work was just too great. Equally, for things like procrastination, I usually have the guitar sitting next to the sofa so that if I want to procrastinate, it's easier for me to just pick up the guitar than it is to pick up my phone or do something unproductive. And so the principle of environment design is useful because we can design our environment in a way that reduces friction. And when we reduce friction, we reduce the activation energy that we need to put in to get started at doing something. And then once we get started, more often than not, we'll just continue doing the thing. So 2-minute rule, 5-minute rule, and environment design, just some general ideas on how we can kind of combat this issue of getting started with doing stuff. If you guys watching this have any extra tips, do please stick them in the class discussion section. This is the bit that we all struggle with, the motivation aspect and the procrastination aspect, and whatever strategies we can use to overcome that, life will just become a lot easier and we'll all become more productive, which is why we're here watching this class. So thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video. All right, so we've talked about being the plane, and when we're the plane, we want to start by taking off, which involves managing motivation and just kind of talking ourselves into just getting started with doing the thing. Now we're going to talk about staying the course. And one of the most important ways in which we can stay the course is if we can get into what's called the flow state. And the idea comes from a guy called Mihaly. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his second name, but he's written a book all about the flow state. And he's got this interesting diagram, which talks about how we get into flow. And we've got this graph of low to high ability and low to high challenge. So if something is low ability and not much of a challenge, we're going to feel apathetic towards it. We might feel sad or depressed. Equally, if something's low ability and high challenge, we're either going to feel worry or anxiety towards it. But the interesting stuff happens when something is high ability. So as in it requires a lot of us, but it's also a challenge and we can kind of rise to that challenge. That's when we get to this kind of key thing called the flow state. And so really to get into the flow state, we want to find something that's enough of a challenge for us, but that our abilities can also handle. And that's what's ultimately going to make us more focused and happy. And if we get into the flow state, it's one of those things where the research shows that actually it's a really psychologically fulfilling and satisfying state to be in. And therefore we kind of circumvent all of the issues we have around distractions and procrastination. Because if we're in the flow state, we won't want to break our flow state concentration to check our phone for notifications or to watch Netflix. The problem we usually get is that when we're not in the flow state, that's when we're kind of doing something that's a bit too relaxing or a bit too boring. At that point, we start feeling the need to check our phones or to reply to a message or whatever. And one of the problems with the flow state is that as hard as we try to get into it, it's not 100% guaranteed. In fact, there's a good quote from a guy called Stephen Kotler, who wrote a book about peak performance. And he says, as much as we've learned about its biological correlates and mental benefits, flow is still a happy accident when it happens. All we can do is make ourselves more accident prone. So there's no kind of firm 100% guaranteed way to achieve flow, but there are 7 techniques that we can use to kind of increase the odds that we'll slip into the flow state. And often when we're slipping into flow, we actually don't notice consciously that we're slipping into flow. We just find ourselves just kind of, we look up and suddenly 3 hours has gone by and we've just been so focused on this thing that we've been doing. And that's such a satisfying feeling. So firstly, we want to manage external distractions. And research suggests that in order to get into flow state, we want to kind of remove all external sources of distraction. It's really hard to get into flow when you're being interrupted every 30 seconds by something or another. And there's a whole lesson in this class about specifically how to manage external distractions. But one of the obvious things is, put our phone away. This is like the easiest thing for me. The phone and notifications are what I'm going to get distracted by. So what I do is I chuck my phone onto the sofa when I'm doing something, and I fully recognize that there's unlikely to be a life-changing, life emergency call that I'm gonna absolutely desperately need to take. And if there is, I just have it on kind of the do not disturb mode anyway, where if someone phones me twice in a row, then I'll get the phone call. Usually, the vast majority of the time, it is not a life or death situation we have to deal with. It's just a case of chucking our phone away and managing that external distraction. Secondly, to improve our chances of getting into flow, we wanna try and manage internal distractions as well. And those can be just as bad, if not worse, than the external distractions. Those are things like stress and anxiety and worries and this random thought of something that I had to do. And there's a few different ways of getting this. Usually I found that in the past, when I've had lots of internal distractions, it's been when I haven't had either a clear journaling practice in the morning or when I haven't written down stuff on a to-do list. Because as David Allen constantly reminds us, our mind is for having ideas, not for storing them. And I find that for me, when I'm in kind of this mode where I'm storing lots of stuff in my mind and I haven't externalized it to some kind of external system like a notepad or a journal or an app, then I'll find myself more distracted by these internal things of, oh, I might have to do this. Oh, I'm a bit annoyed about that or whatever. Some people say as well that meditation helps with this sort of thing. I don't meditate much myself or at all, but it's something I'm trying to look into because I've seen there's so much evidence about the benefits of meditation. But one of the main things people say is that it can help us manage our internal distractions and therefore help us accidentally enter this flow state more often. Thirdly, as much as possible, we want to work on one task at a time. We discussed in the previous class about the myth of multitasking, how it's not really a thing, and we're far more likely to get into the flow state if we can just focus on one thing at a time rather than switching between apps, switching between different contexts, because there is a lot of research about the attentional residue that if we switch context to something or another, there's a little bit of our attention that stays focused on the thing that we've just switched away from, and that's not what we want if we want to try and enter the flow state. There's another tactic that we can use, and that involves setting up a mental cue. Now, because our brain is kind of a pattern recognition machine, and it responds a lot to conditioning, kind of stimulus and then reward. What we want to do is we want to try and create an environment whereby we've got a mental cue for us to enter into that flow state more often. So for me, that's usually that if I'm sitting down to do something that's going to be difficult and require kind of high ability, i.e., peak to enter into this flow state, what I'll do is I'll make myself a cup of coffee before and make sure that my desk is completely clean. And then what I'll often do is switch my desk to standing mode. And so that combination of clean desk, cup of coffee, and standing mode makes me far more likely to enter the flow state. If you don't have a standing desk, you don't need one. It's just that everyone has these different mental triggers that help us get into our flow states more often. Point number 5, we want to choose challenging but not impossible tasks. And going back to Mihaly's diagram, we've got kind of high ability, high challenge will give us flow state. But if it's too challenging to the point where we actually can't get it done, at that point it's going to feel very demoralizing, demotivating. And so for me, I'm not going to get into flow state if I try and lift 200 kilograms on the bench press when I'm at the gym. It's just not going to happen. Equally, I'm not going to get into the flow state if I'm trying to learn the piano and I attempt one of Beethoven's concertos or something stupid like that. Instead, I'm going to get into flow state when I'm attempting something that is just challenging enough to be interesting, but not so challenging that it's super, super, super hard and demotivating. Point number 6, we can work at our biological peak time. Now there's some evidence, it's not fully established, but there's some evidence about this idea of different chronotypes. That, some people are more likely to be early birds, some are more likely to be night owls. And I'll put a link in the project and resources sections to a little quiz that you can do to help figure out what your chronotype is. For me, I find that I'm not very focused, super, super early in the morning. And so even though I'd love to be one of those people that sleep super early, wake up at 4 a.m. and do a workout and then focus, that hasn't worked for me historically. And so I feel like, if I actually want to get stuff done, I should just kind of go with my natural biological clock, which usually involves waking up somewhere between 8 and 9 in the morning, kind of having a fairly chill hour, doing my coffee, my morning pages, whatever, and then starting to get into flow from around 10 or 11 onwards. Usually I'll work for a few hours and then try and do a workout in the middle of the day, and then I'll have another period of deep work sort of in the afternoon to the evening time. And I find that in the evening, usually I'm not that focused, so I'll try and do activities that don't require me to enter this flow state as much, like replying to emails, for example. But the main point here is that to maximize your chances of getting into the flow state, you want to work to your own biological clock. And like I said, there's a link in the description below for a quiz thing that you can take to see what yours is going to be. There's another thing I find helpful, and that is listening to the right sorts of music. So I have a Study With Me playlist, which is full of instrumental songs from films and TV shows and games. And so I find that it's a lot easier for me to get into focus when I've got the Lord of the Rings soundtrack banging in my ears, or the Inception soundtrack, or the World of Warcraft soundtrack. All of that stuff without lyrics really helps me get into that state of flow much better. Some people say that music with lyrics, or rap music or whatever, helps them get into flow. Maybe that'll work for you. The evidence says that if you're trying to kind of optimize your memory for remembering things, you probably don't want to listen to music at all. But if you do, then music without lyrics is better than music with lyrics, because the theory is that music with lyrics interferes with the phonological loop, which is an aspect of working memory, and that kind of interferes with our attention. So it's hard to focus on words if we also have lyrics in the background. So that's partly why I like instrumental music, but that's another thing that really helps me to get into flow. And finally, to boost our chances of getting into flow, we can strategically consume caffeine if we are susceptible to it. There is some research that says that about 200 milligrams of caffeine, so about 1 or 2 cups of coffee, sort of has been shown to improve your chances of getting into flow and improve performance at various mental and physical tasks. So I personally find that the coffee helps quite a lot. So those were 8 techniques for getting into the flow state. Like I said at the start, it's not like 100% guaranteed every time, but the main thing is that we want to stack the deck in our favor so that when we're sitting down to do a heavy lift or to do something important, we're more likely to get into the flow state, because then we are more likely as our plane to stay the course and to not get distracted by externalities. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, we are continuing our section about flow, how to make our plane kind of not get distracted and stay on course. And in this video, we're talking about distraction management. Now, this is, apart from kind of getting started and taking off, distraction management is one of the things that literally everyone struggles with. But I think there's a few different things going on when we get distracted. Partly, I think some of us like to tell ourselves a cute sounding story of, lol, look at me, I get distracted so much, ha ha ha. And in a way, we use the fact that we get distracted too much almost as a badge of honor. Be like, oh my God, I could literally be doing anything and then I'll just get distracted with my phone. I think there is an element of signaling associated with that. Maybe you do it slightly. I know I certainly do it. Like when I procrastinate, in a way, part of me is viewing it as a badge of honor, as being kind of, I can kind of tell my friends, ha ha ha, I'm cool. That's one side of it. We can't get over that. We just have to stop signaling and stop thinking it's cool to be distracted. Just like, society as a whole needs to stop thinking it's cool to be busy all the time or frazzled all the time or so stressed all the time. It's mostly about the story that we tell ourselves about them. And I think there are rarely any actual cases where we do get distracted when we're not kind of telling ourselves a story about how we're getting distracted. So let's put that aside. Let's say we actually have sincere reasons for getting distracted. I think one of the most common reasons why we get distracted, for example, let's take me. I've had this camera set up for the last 3 hours and I've gotten distracted by something or another from filming this particular video. Firstly, it was because someone came over to have lunch and then we was like, okay, cool, we're gonna have lunch. Then it was another friend was gonna come over and it was like, I might as well wait for the friend to come over and then I can film. Then it was like some dude who came over to my place to help design the bedroom. So that was reasonable. So he came over for a bit, offered him tea, coffee. And then it was just sitting in front of the camera for the last half an hour or so, just browsing random articles on the internet because in a way I was procrastinating kind of from getting started, from getting started at doing this thing. So now that I've gotten started, I'm hoping I won't continue to be distracted. But the point I want to make about this is that when we have a strong reason, a strong why behind what we're doing, we tend not to get distracted from it. So with filming this class, for example, I actually don't really need to film it today. I could film it 2 weeks from now and it wouldn't really change anything. I've just set myself this arbitrary deadline of I want to have all these videos filmed by the end of the day. This is not very strong motivation for me to film the class. It's not a very clear why. There's too much optionality involved. Equally, if we're getting distracted from studying for our exams, often it might be because the long-term goal associated with doing well in our exams is just way too far in the future. There's no kind of short-term feedback loop that's encouraging us to do the thing, so we don't have a very clear why. So partly the way to avoid distraction is to take a step back from it and not worry about kind of being distracted in the moment, but instead figuring out a way of how we can make the thing that we're doing more enjoyable so that we're less prone to get distracted from it, but also how we can make it more important to us. And that's sort of to do with the pilot. So the pilot does, if the pilot has set the right course for us for the right reasons, we are less likely to be distracted. But let's say we've done all that. Let's say we've gotten rid of the signaling aspect of it and we have done our best to have a good reason, like a good why as to why we have to do the thing. Or potentially even it's an exam that we have no choice but to take because we're in medical school and that's what we signed up for and we're paying loads of money for it. So whatever story we tell ourselves, we don't really have a choice. It's not what we're going to be choosing to do with our time. It's what we have to do anyway. Let's put those things aside and let's talk about some tips for managing distractions when we're actually doing the task, when we are trying to keep our plane on course. And basically the most common form of distraction is digital distraction. We tend these days to not really be distracted by non-digital things. We tend not to be distracted by, ooh, it's a very pretty sound of the birds outside. Why don't I go and listen in? Like that tends to be not what we have a problem with. We tend to get distracted by our phones and by going on random websites on the internet. In fact, there's a fun little study from Florida State University where they showed the power of a single notification on your phone is equivalent to a text message or a phone call at getting us distracted from what we need to do. And so recognizing that it's digital distractions that are stopping our plane from, staying on course, what we want to do is we want to increase the friction to getting distracted. We want to make it as annoying as possible for us to distract ourselves to death. And this is an idea based around the theory around building effective and healthy habits from the book The Power of Habit and also James Clear's Atomic Habits. If we want to build good habits, we should reduce the friction to doing the habit. And if we want to overcome bad habits, we need to increase the friction. So right now, my phone is across the table and I don't have it on Do Not Disturb mode. Usually when I'm trying to do anything productive, I will have my phone on Do Not Disturb mode. I will press the little the little moon icon, and then I won't get notifications. Sometimes if I'm desperate, I will put it on airplane mode and I will chuck my phone away and I won't even think about it, because now A, I'm sort of keeping it out of sight and out of mind, therefore I'm less likely to be distracted from it, but B, I've also increased the amount of friction by chucking it away. Now next time I want to check my phone, it's not a case of just reaching across and picking it up. It's a case of being like, oh, okay, let me lean over, just like even a small action like that, even increasing the friction a little bit does wonders in stopping me from getting distracted with my phone. For some of us, this might be impractical. Let's say we are at work and we just keep on getting interrupted by our colleagues. There's other things we can do about that. Like, most people say that, get some noise canceling headphones. When you put your headphones on, it's like a signal to your colleagues that please don't interrupt me, I'm working right now. Or you can set times on your calendar for kind of deep work, so where your colleagues know not to interrupt you. But usually I find that in most people who watch my stuff, it's less a problem of being distracted by other people wanting our attention and more because our phone and our computer wants our attention. So here are 3 actionable things you can do right now to reduce the chances of getting distracted with your phone. Firstly, what you can do is you can rearrange the apps on your home screen. So what I do is that on my home screen, I have only apps that are productive. So things that I want to be doing. So I count Audible as being productive. I count listening to a podcast as being productive. I count Kindle as being productive. I count kind of writing notes as being productive. But on the second page, that's where I have like things like Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, those infinity pools that I'm prone to be distracted by. Therefore, the default screen when I swipe to unlock and open my phone is not a screen that has notifications from Twitter and Instagram on it. That's the second screen. So I have to kind of actively make a choice to move to the second screen to go on those apps. I know some people who do it on like page number 6, and on iPhones it's weird because you can't actually speed to page number 6. You have to kind of scroll. And by the time you do that, it gives your brain enough time to realize, hang on, what am I doing? I should probably not be doing this. Another thing you can do is you can bury social media apps in folders. I kind of tried this at one point. I didn't find it particularly helpful because if I want to go on Twitter, I would just swipe down, search Twitter, and then I would find it. But what you can do is if you're not that keen on using kind of spotlight search, you can bury it within folders, which reduces the odds of you looking at a notification and thinking, ooh, this is good. Obviously, you can also turn all your notifications off, all the relevant notifications. I only get a handful of notifications on my Apple Watch. I get no social media notifications on it because it's just always distracting. And I have turned off different categories of notifications on my phone so that I only really see the stuff that I want to see. There's another thing that you can do if you're really desperate to not get distracted, and that is set your phone to grayscale mode. So this is an option in the accessibility settings of most phones, and you can just Google how to set grayscale on iPhone or how to set grayscale on Android, and you'll find instructions. Angus, one of the guys on my team, does this with his phone, and he found that it reduced his screen time usage by about 50%. Because when stuff is in grayscale, like black and white, it's just a lot less appealing going through Instagram and scrolling through Snapchat and stuff like that. So that's one relatively easy way of getting rid of the desire we have to lose ourselves in those infinity pools. But all that's well and good. Basically, to not get distracted from our phone, we just need to chuck it away and stick it on Do Not Disturb mode. If someone needs to contact us in an emergency, usually the first call goes to voicemail, but the second call comes through. So if the phone twice in a row, a phone call can still get through. If you're going to be one of those people that says, but what if there's a life-threatening emergency and someone needs to contact me? Like, they'll be able to contact you when your phone's on Do Not Disturb mode, provided they ring you twice. But otherwise, I've basically never had a life-threatening emergency phone call, and I've gotten distracted with my phone a zillion times a day. So I think it's one of those things that we make a big deal of that's actually not too important in real life. When it comes to getting distracted on our computers, easy things we can do. Number 1, turn Wi-Fi off so we're not allowed to go on the internet if you're doing something offline, like filming a course like this one. Alternatively, if you have to be on the internet, you can use Chrome extensions like self-control that block social media websites if that's what you struggle with. And in fact, the one thing that I found actually helped me sort of almost cut my distraction basically by about 90% is that I just got rid of social media sites or the sites I was getting distracted from my bookmarks bar. Because like before, I remember when I was studying for university exams, normally in my bookmarks bar, I would have Twitter, Hacker News, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube. And I just kind of removed those bookmarks in the run up to exams. And I found that when it wasn't easy for me to click on Reddit, I would have to actively think, I want to go on Reddit at this point. And I'd realized that actually I don't want to go on Reddit at this point. I realized that Most of my distraction from Reddit was purely the fact that it was available and I could click on it. So even just doing something simple, just that slightly adds friction to the thing you want to stop yourself getting distracted from doing. Just adding a small amount of friction really makes all the difference. And so that's kind of the whole message of this video. Distraction management is about mastering our own internal impulses and not being a little bitch who gets distracted by clicking on Reddit, like I do all the time. But secondly, it's about recognizing that the more friction we can add to the distracting activities, the less likely we are to do them. So hopefully that was semi-useful. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.